Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about chapter 11, family and marriage relationships. I'm going to give you just a quick apology. I have two kittens in here again, and as I'm recording, I keep stopping so that in case this happens, but then I have a little guy here who wants to jump on my lap, and I keep stopping my video in case he wants to, but then he doesn't. So I'm not sure what he's doing, but he might make a cameo. As well as another kitten who's off to the side. They're both waiting for me to feed them. So you might hear a little bit of meowing. Everybody's fine. There's no danger. They're just hungry. Okay, so we have got, as I said, we're going to be talking about family and marriage. And so we've got topics that for today would be family relationships, family communication, sibling relationships, and then also, as I said, marriage relationships. Let me just make sure I didn't miss a slide. Okay, families, we talked a little bit about culture, and our authors would say that families have their own cultures, which makes sense, right? If culture means any group with a shared system of meaning, and a family represents even two people, it's likely that they have a shared system of meaning. So that makes really great sense. Those families will have their own patterns, values, rituals, customs, beliefs, and even practices. Here's what happens in our family. We take our shoes off inside the house, or we, I don't know, always leave the door open, or whatever those things are. Families have their own ways of doing things. They provide us with 3 definitions of family. And so these are just, I think there are some quiz questions, but it's really just good to be aware that there are different ways of looking at it. Burgess' definition of family would say that those are people who are legally tied to each other, live together, interact together, and create a common culture. I could see some of those things. I don't know that I necessarily agree fully with all of them, but that is one definition of family. Murdoch's definition of family is a little more specific. It says a social group defined as adults of both sexes, with at least 2 of them maintaining a socially approved sexual relationship, economic cooperation, and reproduction. As you can imagine, not everybody agrees with that, because you can say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't allow for same-sex couples. Like, what do you mean? Or the adoption of kids. So that is just, it's important to know that there are people who believe these different types of marriage or family, I should say. I'm not suggesting you agree with any of these. I'm just suggesting these are what exist. And then the Malinowski's definition is family versus tribal familial structures defined by the family member. What the family versus tribal familial structure means, it kind of is like, listen, we may or may not even live together, but we've chosen to be affiliated with one another. And if you ask a family member, if you ask a person in that group, they will define themselves as family. Of the 3, I personally relate most to Malinowski's definition because, well, for a lot of reasons, but one of which is that growing up, my aunt was a foster parent. And so she always had foster kids, and then she adopted, maybe I think 10 kids of all different nationalities and abilities. And so I come from a very distinct family. And then there were people who, the foster kids that she had that didn't stay, weren't adopted, so they returned home, but we still consider them family we still do. And so my family definition is very broad. It's people who I choose to, so sorry, this is Addie. You want to see her in real time? Okay, she's changing my slides. Sorry. I choose to call family, and that's what Malinowski's saying, is who do I define as family? So for me, it's a very broad, oh, here she comes again. I mentioned the word FOOD to her, and so now she's trying to get me off the computer. Okay, I consider my cats family, obviously, which not everybody would. Some people think they're creepy and sad and don't ever, I'm hoping nobody tells me you don't think they're creepy and sad, but I suppose to each his and her own. So I'm teasing in case you can pick up from my tone. It's okay if you don't love cats. Our book would also talk about 8 defining traits of family. We aren't going to spend a lot of time on this. Again, most of you know this, so I'm just presenting them in a package as offered by our authors. 2 or more people tied by marriage, blood, adoption, or choice. Again, this is just another general way of looking at family. Living together or apart, or by choice or circumstance, so we don't have to live in the same house to be family. Having some sort of interaction with family roles, I could see how that one would be true, because we all sort of play roles in our family, even if they're not spoken about. Creating and maintaining a common culture, I would agree with that one. Being characterized by economic cooperation, meaning are some of the people contributing financially or impacted by those contributions? Number 6, deciding to have or not have children owned or owned, either their own or adopted. And then having boundaries, I would agree with that. Whether those boundaries are weak or strong, there's some sort of presence of boundaries in families. And then claiming mutual affection, love and or trust is what I would say about that, because you may love everyone in your family, but don't trust them. You may trust lots of people in your family, but at this moment, you don't feel a lot of love for them. So it's hard, it's different for everybody. In addition, the authors would say there's two continuums. I would call it one continuum with really two sides. So one would be socio-orientation, which is the degree to which we conform to what those expectations are. So on that side of the spectrum, it's when we are on a conforming view of family, we value similarity over individual expression, and then we value harmony over each person's specific opinion. We're conforming to what everybody else believes. There's some families in that space. The other side of that is expression. So freedom of expression is encouraged, even if we don't all agree, even if we don't talk for weeks. I want to hear what you have to say. That's just the way we work. Communication, though, is likely frequent because we are encouraging expression. And then those people might consider family life as pleasurable because they feel free to express their identities or their thoughts and opinions. There's not to say that one is better than the other. We're just looking at like a spectrum, and like families are somewhere on that spectrum. You're going to be so happy to see this. I think this slideshow has like 2 more of these quadrant type visual aids. I'm assuming you guys are making it this far in the video. So we have another way of looking at family communication patterns. Again, there are 4 quadrants. On the left, so it's top and bottom, again, is that socio-orientation, that conformity. And on the right, the concept orientation is where we think about like expression. So on the top left, where it says pluralistic, there is an interest in mutual respect and interest. We want to conform with what is great for everybody. How do I want to say? No, I said that the wrong way. We're not going to conform as much because we want to allow for everybody's freedom and expression. On the bottom, where it's consensual, there's high conformity, but also high expression. So that's what consensual is. It's like we're constantly communicating about, does this work for you? Does this work for you? You could think of that sometimes as pressure to agree, because there's always that constant communication about, does everyone agree with this? Some of you can maybe relate to the next one, which is protective. I always think protective is an interesting word for this, because there's high conformity, but low ability to express oneself. So this is where there's expression or an emphasis on child obedience in order for family harmony to exist. And so there's a strong power dynamic in that case of like, you're the child, I'm the parent, you're not supposed to ask me any questions. That's what that looks like. It's called protective, which I find is a strange word for it, but that's what that looks like. And then there's a laissez-faire, where there's also, again, low conformity, but super high expression. And so it's like, well, do what you feel is right. In that family, they want to allow the children to be expressive to the maximum without feeling confined in any way. So these are just 4 different ways of looking at communication patterns in families. I'm interested to know which one you guys relate to. We also have family changes. There aren't corresponding slides for each of these. So I'm going to talk through them just really quickly. But most of it is self-explanatory. So one change would be you've got some young singles. And then number 2 would be young couples, no children. Number 3 would be full nest 1 means a couple with preschool children. So full nest, think of like a lot of people in a house. That's a good way to remember that. The nest being the house. And since it's a 1, that means the kids are early on in their years. Full nest 2 is, again, a lot of people in the house, but the kids have started going off to school. Full nest 3 would be older children. Think about that, like high school, maybe college. Well, no, I guess it would just be high school would be like the oldest. And then empty nest 1 is when the parents are still working, but the children, when they say launched, that's like either off to college, they've gone off, they're over 18, they're moved out with roommates, they've gone to the military. That's what launched. Have you guys seen that movie Failure to Launch with Matthew McConaughey and I think Kate Hudson? Is it? No, it's not Kate Hudson. It's Sarah Jessica Parker. There's a whole movie about that. It's called Failure to Launch because they had a man who was, I think, like 30 and he still hadn't left the home. In this case, we're talking about empty nest 1 would be like when the kids start leaving, but the parents are still working. 7 is empty nest 2, which is definitely the kids are likely to be gone, but also the parents have started, they're about 60s, 65, so they can retire. And then unfortunately, number 8 is solitary survivor. Still obviously retired, but probably there's only one spouse left. So you can see over the course of time, that's what this continuum is. It says changes, but it's based on like a lifespan for families. I don't think the authors are trying to suggest this is the way we should progress through life, because there's an assumption here that there are children involved. Maybe you choose not to have children. There's an assumption here that at some point kids leave the house. Again, this day and age, it's so expensive. Maybe kids don't leave the house until much, much later. But this is a way, probably a much more traditional way. If I had to guess, I don't know when this was developed, but off the top of my head, but it is more a traditional way, of looking at changes in families for sure. This is a fun slide because for those looking at this slide, my picture's a little bit blurry here. These are my actual twin nieces, and I did not tell them I was putting them in my slideshow. I went to California with them a couple of months ago, and I learned that this was our first night there. We had to take some beach sunset pics is what we had to do. And so it was that my twin nieces and a couple of their friends, we went and they got dressed up so that we could go down to the beach, eat dinner, and then they went back home and put on sweats to walk around the Huntington Beach area. So I just thought this was fun because they're siblings. Our book talks about both sibling hostility and sibling warmth, if I can say the word. Sibling hostility, as you can imagine, is when they're more likely to have aggression, anxiety, depression, loneliness, meaning that they don't get along. As you can see from this picture, these two appear to get along because nobody told them they have to, hug and touch hands. So they did that on their own. So there's likely, this is a good picture of sibling warmth. They are more likely to engage in pro-social behaviors, which just means pro-social is like positively show signs of getting along, especially when they're out in front of other people, but just in general, like you can tell they like each other. So that's sibling warmth. Ta-da, we have another quadrant situation happening. There's another visual here. It talks about 2 degrees. On the left, sibling hostility, from low to high on the left, so that as you see from the top to bottom. And then the word sibling warmth on the bottom, low being the bottom left quadrant and high being the bottom right quadrant. So I'll talk through this. In hostile relationships, again, there's a high degree of hostility and a low degree of warmth, meaning we're just like full out all the time arguing, we're not getting along. Uninvolved is when there's not really a lot of hostility, but there's also not a lot of warmth. So like if you're like, meh, I have a sibling, but like, meh, that would be uninvolved. Harmonious is when you are like, It's a low hostility and high warmth. We just get along, living our best lives. That's what harmonious is. Maybe it's not perfect, but we're making efforts. The reason you can tell my nieces also are maybe towards this harmonious side is as they've gone off to college, they're roommates also, which they did not have to do. So it's a sign there's harmony there. We'll see what happens in year 2. They're still in year 1. And then the affect intense is when there is high hostility, but also high warmth, which you might say like, wait, what? How does that happen? It's better than just being hostile all the time. And it says it's often found in divorced families. And I think we could think about affect intense, which means it's very emotional. And maybe you're up here one time and you're down here. And maybe it depends on who you live with. Are you both with your dad? Are you both with your mom? Is one over here, one over there? I can relate, I think, to this one a little bit. My parents divorced when I was little, and we always had different combinations of parents and siblings living together after the divorce. And it always did feel like it's like high emotion, not necessarily hostile, but definitely high emotion. More than like if my parents had stayed married and it was just like a consistent traditional household, I probably would have more harmonious relationships. But I can relate to that one as well, I think. As far as sibling relationships go, I picked this when I found this image. I typed in siblings graduating from college. So I'm maybe in my mind hoping that these are quadruplets. They don't all look the same exact age to me, but in my mind, that's what I've decided. Or maybe they're not all the same age, but they all graduated in the same semester. There are six different ways siblings maintain relationships. 1, confirmation, which is, again, I see you, I validate you, I hear you. Humor, poking fun at each other and just laughing in general. Social support, being there for each other. Family events, that's like going to them, helping with them, participating. Escape means, I think in this case, taking time for yourself to find your individual, but also like just having some individuality, I think, in terms of maintaining relationships. And then with regard to verbal aggression, and in the context of maintaining relationships, I think siblings, in this case, as we're talking about it, would make an effort not to be verbally aggressive. Yes, it's easy to say hurtful things in the heat of a moment, but if you make a point to be good friends with siblings, you are less likely to have those instances of verbal aggression come out as easily because you've sort of invested in building a friendship in all of these other ways. And so verbal aggression is not maybe your first choice or come easily to you. This is such an involved slide, and so I'm going to try to simplify it. Also, full disclosure, I have not been married. So I'm not going to talk a lot about marriage and how to have a great marriage because I can't answer that for you. Our book does have some helpful information. I thought this slide was at least interesting. Again, I think our book talks about marriage in a more traditional way. This is more than 4 quadrants. There's a lot happening here. So what I'll point out is how a few things overlap. On the left, we have interdependence, the degree to which people are heavily dependent on one another. And then on the top, we have conventional, which is like traditional ways of viewing the world. Conventional ideology means the traditional way. And unconventional means less traditional ways. So what this is saying is traditional views of marriage, if you will. No, not views of marriage. People who step into maybe more traditional roles under conventional ideology might be seen as a high level of independence, high level of interdependence, which means heavily connected, but also as a result, maybe there's a lot more opportunity for conflict. Under conventional ideology, people who identify as separate do so because they're not as interdependent. They have like my aunt and my uncle, I would consider interdependent because my uncle's got a whole setup in his garage and he's like a MacGyver type guy, but he also has a TV out there and a computer and blah, blah, blah. So he likes to spend time out there doing his own thing. When my aunt is like maybe crafting inside, they spend time together, but a lot of their day is actually separate. And so as a result, they're not interacting a lot, so there's not as much conflict. When you go over to unconventional ways of communicating in marriage relationships, we have what the book would call is an independent, kind of like a traditional, but because again, it's high conflict, a lot of interdependence. They would refer to themselves, though, I think, as independence, just because they would not consider themselves as traditional. Traditional, again, might be, we might think of more of like man and woman around a certain age, or like, maybe a certain time of their life, where unconventional ideology would not necessarily follow all of those same parameters. But the interesting thing here is that a takeaway for marriage is what this is suggesting is people who are highly interdependent or connected, like spending lots of time together, also seem to have higher level of conflict. You could say, oh my gosh, well, maybe the trick to happy marriages don't spend time together. I think it's probably a balance. A good example I have of that also is one year I worked at Kohl's over the Christmas holiday. I thought it would be fun. It was a little bit fun, but I will never do it again. I worked in the jewelry department, and there was a man that came in. He was an older man, and he was buying something for his wife, and he's like, let me get one of these, one of these, one of these. And I was like, oh, okay, big day. What's going on? Is this Christmas? Because I'm chatting about everything. And he goes, well, I've been married 50 years, and I figure I should get her some things. And I'm like, oh, well, tell me. I've not been married yet. What's the secret to being married that year or that long? And he looked at me, he goes, I got me a big garage, and I go out in it. And I was like, okay. So basically you're saying, I think the takeaway here is not that you shouldn't spend time together, but when we are overly dependent on the other person, and we, as a result, spend a lot of time, it makes sense. There's more opportunity for conflict because we're so overly connected. So again, I don't think the takeaway is don't spend time together. I think it's maybe have a good balance. Like these separates here, they're not quite so interdependent. And then maybe have great communication skills to talk through the conflicts when they arise. That would be my takeaway from looking at this and looking at our research. But again, I can't offer personal accounts. My apologies. I will try to share though some, I have some tips that I can share like on videos that I've seen and stuff like that. I do recommend looking at the chapter. All right, so in this chapter, we talked about family relationships, family communication, sibling relationships, and then also marriage relationships. I look forward to seeing your feedback for this week, and please let me know if you have any questions. Bye, everybody.